The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a whip against pine. His smile stretched too wide. Wind howled through the gaps in the station house walls, carrying the stench of unwashed bodies and desperation. Dust swirled around the makeshift platform where women stood in tattered dresses, their eyes fixed on the plank floor. The afternoon sun slanted harsh through broken shutters, casting shadows that made every face look haunted. "Next lot," the auctioneer barked, his voice cutting through the murmur of assembled men. "Mail-order bride, comes with papers and complications." Jack Thornton shifted his weight against the back wall, hat pulled low. The silver dollar in his pocket felt heavier than a lead bullet. 3 months of drought had left his cattle thin and his water rights disputed. Every other rancher in the territory had more coin than sense, more land than he could ever hope to match. The woman they led onto the platform moved like she carried the weight of the world in her swollen belly. Her brown hair hung lank around a face marked by exhaustion and shame. The auctioneer didn't even look at her. "Bride's got 6 months on her," he announced, patting his vest pocket where folded papers rustled. "Previous arrangement fell through. Starting bid $50. Silence stretched like a held breath. 40? Still nothing. 30. Come now, gentlemen, she's got good teeth and strong hands. A rancher near the front spat tobacco juice. "Look at her. Ain't worth feeding. $20. The woman's shoulders sagged. Her hand moved protectively over her belly, and Jack caught the glint of tears she refused to let fall. Something twisted in his chest. The same feeling he'd had watching his mother fade away, proud and alone. $10, the auctioneer called, desperation creeping into his practiced patter. Surely someone. 5. The voice belonged to Coleman Briggs, the territory's wealthiest cattle baron. He lounged against a support beam, gold watch chain catching the light. $5 for the breeding stock. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The woman's face went white. "Sold to," the auctioneer began. $1. Every head turned toward Jack. He stepped forward, boots echoing on the rough planks, and pulled the silver coin from his pocket. The weight of 40 stares pressed against his shoulders. Briggs straightened. "Did you say $1, Thornton?" "I did." "Son," the auctioneer sputtered, "the bid's already at 5. From a man who ain't got $5 cash in his pocket right now. Jack's voice carried clear to the back of the room. "I'm offering legal tender, silver coin, right here, right now." Briggs patted his vest, found it empty, and his face darkened. "This is irregular. I can have the money by auction rules state cash on the barrelhead." Jack stepped closer to the platform. "You want to change the rules for every man here who's got more promises than coin?" The assembled crowd shifted restlessly. Most of them knew the sting of Briggs's credit schemes and unpaid debts. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The auctioneer glanced between Jack's silver dollar and Briggs's empty hands. "Sold," he said quickly, "to Mr. Thornton for $1. The woman looked up at Jack for the first time. Her eyes were the color of sage-grass after rain. Tired, but not broken. Not yet. "Come on," Jack said quietly, extending his hand to help her down from the platform. "Let's get you out of here." She hesitated, then took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the heat. Behind them, Briggs's voice rose above the crowd's chatter. "You'll regret this, Thornton. That woman's nothing but trouble, and you ain't got the means to feed one mouth, let alone 2. Jack didn't turn around. He guided the woman through the crowd toward the door, feeling their stares like brands on his back. Outside, his horse stood patient in the afternoon heat, saddled and ready. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him with something between suspicion and hope. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Sarah Mitchell, I'm Jack Thornton. I got a ranch about 10 miles north. It ain't much, but it's got 4 walls and a roof that don't leak too bad." "Why?" The word came out cracked, barely a whisper. Jack studied her face. The fine lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter before hardship, the stubborn set of her jaw that said she'd fight if she had to. "Because everybody deserves better than being sold like cattle." He helped her onto his horse, swinging up behind her. As they rode away from the station, Sarah's shoulders gradually relaxed against his chest. The baby kicked once, hard enough that Jack felt it through her thin dress. "When's it due?" he asked. 2 months, maybe 3. Her voice was steadier now. "The father, he was killed in a mining accident. Left me with nothing but debts and his name." "You don't have to explain." "I do." She twisted to look at him. "You paid for me. You got a right to know what you bought." Jack reined the horse to a stop. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the grassland gold. "Sarah, I didn't buy you. I bought you time. What you do with it is up to you." Something shifted in her expression. The walls she'd built around herself didn't crumble, but they cracked just enough to let light through. The Thornton Ranch squatted in a valley between 2 low hills, a collection of weathered buildings connected by worn paths and split rail fences. The main house was small but solid, built from local stone with a wide porch that faced east toward the sunrise. A barn, corral, and chicken coop completed the homestead, along with a windmill that creaked steadily in the evening breeze. "It's not much," Jack said, dismounting and helping Sarah down. She stood in the yard, one hand on her back, and looked around with an expression he couldn't read. The chickens had gathered hopefully at the fence, expecting their evening feed. A cow lowed from the pasture beyond the barn. "It's clean," she said finally, "and quiet." Jack showed her inside. The house had 2 rooms, a main room with a stone fireplace and kitchen area, and a smaller room with a bed and washstand. Simple furniture, all handmade. A few books on a shelf, clean dishes on the table. "You can have the bedroom," Jack said. "I'll sleep out here." Sarah ran her hand along the kitchen table's surface, worn smooth by years of use. "Your wife's?" "My mother's. She died 2 winters ago." Jack moved to the fireplace and began building a fire. "Cancer took her slow. She kept this place running right up until the end." "I'm sorry." "She'd have liked you. Always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they did when they had nothing left." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire catch and grow. "I can cook," she said finally. "And mend. Keep a garden. I'm not afraid of work." "I never figured you were." That first night, Sarah slept in the bedroom while Jack made a bed on the floor by the fire. He lay awake listening to her move restlessly, trying to find a comfortable position with her swollen belly. Sometime near midnight, he heard her crying, soft, muffled sobs that she tried to hide in the pillow. He didn't go to her. Some grief was too private for comfort. The next morning, Sarah was up before dawn, moving quietly around the kitchen. Jack woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She'd found his mother's apron and tied it around her waist as best she could. "Eggs are fresh," she said when she saw him stirring. "Chickens are good layers." Jack sat up, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't have to. I told you I could cook." She set a plate in front of him, eggs, bacon, biscuits that were golden and perfect. Besides, I was hungry. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning light streaming through the windows. Outside, the cattle were moving toward the water trough, their bells clanking softly. "What's your plan?" Sarah asked eventually. Jack looked up from his coffee. "Plan? For the ranch, the drought. That man yesterday, Briggs. He seemed to think you were in trouble." Jack's jaw tightened. Briggs thinks every small rancher in the territory should sell out to him. Make him the cattle king of Texas. But you won't. This land belonged to my father and his father before him. They bled for every acre. I'm not about to hand it over to a man who thinks people are livestock. Sarah nodded slowly. Then we better figure out how to make it work. The word "we" hung in the air between them, Jack felt something warm uncurl in his chest. Something he hadn't felt since his mother died. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple relief of not being alone. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Jack worked the cattle and mended fences while Sarah tended the garden and chickens. She moved carefully but steadily, her hands always busy. She had a gift with growing things. The vegetables responded to her touch, and even the chickens seemed to lay more eggs. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked. Sarah told him about her life before. Growing up on a farm in Missouri, marrying young to a man who had dreams bigger than his sense. Jack shared stories of his parents, of learning to work the land and read the sky for weather signs. "Your mother sounds like she was a strong woman," Sarah said one night, watching the stars emerge. "Strongest person I ever knew. She could deliver a calf, shoot a rattlesnake, and bake bread all in the same morning." Jack smiled at the memory. Used to say that strength wasn't about how much you could lift, but how much you could carry without breaking. Sarah's hand moved to her belly. "I hope I can be that strong for this little one." "You already are." 3 weeks after the auction, trouble arrived in the form of dust on the horizon. Jack was working on a broken section of fence when he saw the riders approaching. 5 men, riding hard, led by Coleman Briggs himself. Jack set down his tools and walked to meet them, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Sarah appeared on the porch, drawn by the sound of horses. Briggs reined up, his horse dancing nervously. "Thornton." "Briggs, what brings you out this way?" "Heard you've been having water troubles." Briggs's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Heard tell your cattle been wandering onto my land, drinking from my streams." "My cattle stay where they belong." "That's funny, because I got witnesses say different." Briggs gestured to the men behind him. "Boys saw at least 30 head with your brand drinking from Willow Creek yesterday?" Jack kept his voice level. "Willow Creek runs through my land for 2 miles before it hits your property line. Has for 20 years. Not according to this." Briggs pulled out a folded document, waving it in the air. "New territorial survey. Turns out that creek's been on my land all along. You've been trespassing." "Let me see that paper." Briggs folded it away. "Don't need to. It's all legal and proper. Signed by the territorial governor himself." Sarah stepped down from the porch, moving carefully. "Might be legal," she said quietly, "but it ain't proper." All eyes turned to her. Briggs's smile widened. "Well, if it ain't the $1 bride, you got something to add to this conversation, girl?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I got eyes, and I can read. That paper you're waving around, It's got fresh ink on it. Can smell it from here. Briggs's face darkened. You calling me a liar? I'm saying that ink smells newer than last week's wash. Jack felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Sarah was right. He could see the telltale signs of forgery now that she'd pointed them out. But calling Briggs a liar in front of witnesses was dangerous business. Seems to me, Jack said carefully, that any document that important ought to be filed with the territorial office in Austin. Recorded proper, with seals and signatures. It will be. But it ain't yet. Sarah stepped closer, her hand on her belly, which means it ain't legal until it's filed. And until then, this is still Jack's land and Jack's water. Briggs's horse sidestepped nervously as his rider's temper flared. You got a smart mouth for a whore bought at auction. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Jack's hand moved to his pistol, but Sarah caught his wrist. Mr. Briggs, she said, her voice deadly calm. You might want to choose your next words real careful, because the last man who called me that name is buried in Missouri dirt, and his killer never saw justice. The lie rolled off her tongue smooth as silk, but it had the desired effect. Briggs and his men shifted uneasily in their saddles. This ain't over, Briggs said finally. No, Jack agreed. I expect it ain't. The riders wheeled their horses and thundered away, leaving a cloud of dust and the promise of future trouble. Jack and Sarah stood in the yard until the sound of hooves faded. That was well done, Jack said, but dangerous. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Sometimes dangerous is the only choice you got. That night, as they sat by the fire, Sarah told him the truth about her husband's death. He'd been a good man, but weak, prone to gambling and wild schemes. When the mine collapsed, it was an accident, but sabotage. Claimed jumpers who wanted the site for themselves. Sarah had been left with debts and threats, forced to flee Missouri in the middle of the night. I never killed nobody, she admitted. But I would have, if they'd come for me again. Jack nodded. He'd suspected there was more to her story than she'd told. But the details didn't matter. What mattered was the woman sitting across from him, brave enough to face down Briggs and his men, despite carrying a child and having nowhere else to go. We need to get to Austin, he said. Check the territorial records, see what Briggs has really filed. That's a 3-day ride, 4 in my condition. Then we better start preparing. But preparation became impossible when Sarah's water broke 2 days later, 6 weeks early. Jack found her doubled over in the garden, her face white with pain. It's too soon, she gasped. Jack scooped her up and carried her to the house, his mind racing. The nearest doctor was in town, 20 miles away. The midwife lived even further. In the time it would take to fetch help, Sarah could bleed to death. What do I do? He asked, settling her on the bed. Sarah gripped his hand, her nails digging into his palm. You ever deliver a calf? Plenty of times. Same principle, different stakes. She tried to smile, but another contraction hit and she doubled over. There's a book in my bag. My mother's notes on birthing. Jack found the book, a small leather volume filled with careful handwriting. He read fast, his hands shaking. Clean cloths, hot water, steady hands. Most importantly, don't panic. The labor lasted 18 hours. Jack had delivered dozens of calves, but nothing had prepared him for this. The raw courage of a woman bringing life into the world. The primal intimacy of shared struggle. Sarah bore the pain, with grim determination, following her mother's written instructions between contractions. "I can see the head," Jack said as dawn light crept through the windows. "Come on, Sarah. One more push." She gathered her strength and pushed, her face red with effort. The baby slipped into Jack's waiting hands, tiny, slick, perfectly formed. "A girl. Is she—" The baby drew a shuddering breath and let out a wail that could wake the dead. Jack felt tears on his cheeks as he wrapped her in clean cloth and placed her in Sarah's arms. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Sarah looked down at her daughter with wonder. The baby was small but fierce, her tiny fists waving in protest at the bright world. "Hello, little one. I'm your mama. What will you call her?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Hope. Her name is Hope." Jack felt something break open in his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart after too many losses. This tiny scrap of humanity had already changed everything, just by existing. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and constant worry. Hope was small but strong, nursing eagerly and growing steadily. Sarah recovered slowly, her body healing while her spirit seemed to bloom. She sang to the baby, soft lullabies that drifted through the house like prayers. Jack found himself changing too. He'd catch himself smiling at nothing, humming while he worked. The ranch felt different now, not just a place he was fighting to keep, but a home worth protecting. It was Briggs who shattered their fragile peace. Jack was in the barn when he heard horses in the yard. He stepped outside to see a dozen armed men surrounding the house. Briggs sat his horse in the center, a document in his hand. "Jack Thornton," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of false authority. "By order of the territorial government, you are hereby evicted from this property for trespassing on legally claimed land." Jack walked closer, his hand near his gun. "That's a mighty big posse for an eviction, Briggs. These are territorial deputies, duly sworn. This is all legal and proper." Sarah appeared in the doorway, Hope in her arms. The baby was wrapped in a quilt Jack's mother had made, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. "Show me the papers," Jack said. Briggs unfolded the document and held it up. "Deed transfer, signed by the territorial governor. This land belongs to the Briggs Cattle Company now. You got 1 hour to pack your belongings and get out." Jack took a step closer, close enough to see the paper clearly. The ink was still damp in places, and the governor's signature looked freshly traced. "This is forgery, plain and simple." "Careful, Thornton. That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious crime." Jack's voice carried clearly across the yard. "Making false documents, bribing officials, intimidating honest ranchers. The territorial marshal's going to be real interested in this." One of the supposed deputies shifted nervously in his saddle. "Mr. Briggs, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" Briggs's facade was cracking. "Thornton, you got 2 choices. Pack up and leave, or we'll drag you out. There's a third choice." Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She stepped down from the porch, still holding Hope. "You could all turn around and ride away before you do something you'll regret." Briggs laughed. "You threatening us, girl? You and what army?" Sarah smiled. "That army." Jack turned to see dust rising on the eastern horizon. Riders were approaching, a lot of them. As they drew closer, Jack could make out familiar faces. Tom Henderson from the next ranch over, the widow Martinez with her 2 sons, old Pete from the general store. Nearly 20 people in all, armed and and determined. Tom Henderson rode up to the edge of the group, his rifle resting casually across his saddle. "Afternoon, Jack. Sarah, heard you might be having some trouble." "Nothing we can't handle," Jack replied. "Good, because we rode out to deliver something." Tom reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an official-looking document. "This here's a telegram from the Territorial Marshal's office in Austin. Seems there's been some irregularities in land claims around these parts." Briggs's face went white. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Sarah stepped forward, still holding hope. "Because I sent a letter to Austin 3 weeks ago. Told them about forged documents and illegal intimidation. Asked them to investigate. You couldn't have. You never left the ranch." Sarah smiled again, and Jack realized he'd never seen her look more dangerous. "I didn't have to. Tom here was kind enough to deliver it for me. And the Territorial Marshal was very interested in what I had to say." Tom unfolded the telegram and read aloud. "Coleman Briggs and Associates wanted for questioning regarding fraudulent land claims, document forgery, and conspiracy to defraud territorial government. All land transfers pending investigation." The supposed deputies began backing their horses away from Briggs, suddenly eager to distance themselves from their employer. Jack noticed that several of them weren't wearing official badges, just cheap tin stars that could be bought at any general store. "This is a setup," Briggs snarled. "You can't prove nothing." "Can't we?" The widow Martinez rode forward, holding up a leather satchel. "Found this in your office safe, Coleman, full of blank territorial documents, forged seals, and signatures traced from real papers." Briggs reached for his gun, but froze when he found himself looking down the barrels of 20 rifles. The fake deputies had their hands raised, no longer interested in following orders. "I'd keep those hands where we can see them," Tom suggested mildly. Jack walked over to Briggs's horse and reached up for the forged deed. Briggs jerked it away, but Jack was faster. He unfolded the document and held it up for everyone to see. "Take a good look," he called out. "Fresh ink, traced signatures, and a seal that's still wet. This is what passes for law in Coleman Briggs's world." He struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper. The document caught fire, curling and blackening in the afternoon sun. Briggs watched his scheme literally go up in smoke. "The real Territorial Marshal will be here tomorrow," Tom announced, "along with a federal judge. They're real interested in hearing from anyone who's been pressured to sell land or water rights." Briggs looked around at the circle of hostile faces and seemed to realize that his empire was crumbling. "This ain't over," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "It is." The marshal arrived the next day as promised, along with a federal judge and a small army of legitimate deputies. Briggs and his associates were arrested on multiple charges of fraud, conspiracy, and intimidation. The fake documents were seized as evidence, and the Territorial Land Office began the process of sorting out the illegal claims. Jack's ownership of the ranch was confirmed, along with his water rights. More importantly, the investigation revealed that Briggs had been running a massive land grab scheme, using forged documents and hired thugs to force small ranchers off their property. Dozens of families would get their land back. "How did you know?" Jack asked Sarah that evening as they sat on the porch, watching Hope sleep in her makeshift cradle. "The ink," she said simply. "My father was a printer back in Missouri. I grew up around different inks and papers. That document wasn't more than a few days old, no matter what date was on it. But how did you know to send the letter to Austin? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Because I've seen men like Briggs before. They think they're smart, but they always make the same mistake. They underestimate the people they're trying to cheat. They see a pregnant woman or a small rancher and think they're weak. They don't realize that sometimes the people with the least to lose are the most dangerous. Jack reached over and took her hand. That was a hell of a risk. So was buying me at that auction for $1. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The windmill creaked steadily, drawing water from the deep well. "Jack," Sarah said suddenly, "there's something I need to tell you." Jack's heart clenched. He'd been waiting for this moment, for her to say that she was grateful but ready to move on, to find her own way now that the immediate danger had passed. "The baby," she continued, "she's not. Her father wasn't my husband." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a shaky breath. "My husband died in that mine collapse, but I was already carrying another man's child, a man who promised to marry me after my husband's debts were settled. But when he found out about the baby, he disappeared, left me with nothing." She looked at Jack with tears in her eyes. "I lied to you. Hope's father is alive somewhere, probably with another woman by now. I'm not a widow mourning her lost love. I'm a fool who trusted the wrong man twice." Jack was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this revelation. Then he squeezed her hand gently. "Sarah," he said, "I don't care who Hope's father is. What matters is who's going to raise her, who's going to teach her right from wrong, show her how to be strong and kind and brave. Jack, I've watched you these past weeks, seen how you fight for what's right, how you protect what matters. You're not a fool. You're one of the smartest, bravest women I've ever met. And Hope is lucky to have you as her mother." Sarah began to cry. Not the bitter tears of shame and loss, but something deeper and more healing. Jack pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby. "There's something I need to tell you too," he said softly. "These past weeks, having you and Hope here, it's changed everything for me. This place feels like a home again, instead of just a piece of land I'm fighting to keep." Sarah looked up at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, both of you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to ask you to marry me. For real this time. Not as part of some business arrangement, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Sarah's answer was a kiss that tasted of tears and hope and new beginnings. They were married 3 months later by the circuit preacher, with Tom Henderson and the widow Martinez as witnesses. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, and Jack wore his father's best suit. Hope slept peacefully through the ceremony, wrapped in the quilt that had become her favorite blanket. The Briggs investigation had revealed massive corruption throughout the Territorial Land Office. When the dust settled, nearly 100,000 acres of illegally seized land was returned to its rightful owners. Jack found himself not just secure in his ownership, but wealthy. Mineral rights that Briggs had tried to steal turned out to include a significant silver deposit on the North Pasture. The $1 bride had indeed made her husband the richest man in Texas, though not in the way anyone could have predicted. As autumn painted the grasslands gold and red, Jack stood in the doorway of the house, watching Sarah tend her garden, while Hope played in a basket nearby. The baby was crawling now, her chubby hands grasping at everything within reach. Sarah sang softly as she worked, the same lullabies she'd crooned during those first difficult weeks. The ranch had expanded. They'd bought adjoining land from families who wanted to move closer to town, and the herd had doubled in size. But the heart of it remained the same. The small stone house, the windmill, the garden where Sarah worked her quiet magic. Jack thought about that day at the auction, when he'd looked at a desperate woman on a platform and seen something worth saving. He'd bought her time, he'd told her then. But the truth was, she'd bought him something far more valuable, a future he'd never dared to dream of. Hope looked up from her basket and saw Jack watching. She grinned and held up her arms, demanding to be picked up. Jack scooped her up and spun her around, delighting in her gurgling laughter. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, brushing dirt from her hands. "Just remembering," Jack said, settling Hope on his hip. "Seems like a lifetime ago." "In some ways, it was." Sarah came over and kissed Hope's forehead, then Jack's cheek. "We're different people now. Better people. Stronger people. People who know what matters." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Sarah pulled out a small wooden box she'd kept hidden in the bedroom. Inside was the silver dollar Jack had paid for her at the auction, along with a letter written in careful script. "I wrote this the night Hope was born," she said, handing him the letter. "Read it." Jack unfolded the paper and read aloud. "To Hope Elizabeth Thornton, on the day of your birth. Your father paid $1 for your mother at an auction, not knowing he was buying a family and a future. This coin is yours now, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life come from the smallest acts of kindness. May you always remember that every person has worth beyond measure, and that love is the only currency that truly matters." Jack looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You signed her name Thornton." "I hoped," Sarah said simply. "Even then, I hoped." Hope had fallen asleep in Jack's lap, her tiny fist curled around his finger. In the distance, the cattle were settling for the night, their soft lowing carrying on the evening breeze. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over this land for countless generations. "She'll know her story," Jack said quietly. "She'll know that she was wanted, that she was loved from the very beginning. And she'll know that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places." As the fire died down and the night settled around them, Jack thought about legacy and love, about the choices that define us and the courage to make them. A year ago, he'd been a lonely rancher fighting to keep his land. Now he was a husband and father, blessed beyond measure by a woman who taught him that strength wasn't about holding on to what you had, but about opening your heart to what you could become. The $1 coin sat in its wooden box on the table between them, catching the last glint of firelight. A small thing, really. Just a piece of silver with a president's face stamped on it. But like all the best things in life, its true value had nothing to do with what it cost. Don't forget to subscribe and consider giving a like to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.